back in the back left corner. Anyone seen Sarah?
Yes.
Okay.
And Katie's out there too. So we're
Oh,
all
okay.
accounted for. Except for
Okay.
Nina.
Oh, Nina's not. Okay. So we don't have to get mic'd. We got these. We're good. Hey.
Hey, I'm Sonia. I'm the registrator there.
Okay.
So when you're ready, give me a thumbs up, or I'm gonna give you a thumbs up for to start the speech.
Oh, when we start. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm gonna go live.
Okay.
For your speech.
Okay, great. I'll let Kim know. She's moderator, so I'll let her know.
All right then.
Where are you going to be? Are you over there? Or?
No.
Oh, you're right back there. Okay, cool. So like a thumbs up, and we'll be.
Thumbs up, and we can start speaking when you're ready. You can do the same for me. So
Okay.
when you're ready.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Hey, Kim.
Hey.
The live streamer just wanted us to know that when you're ready to start, just give like a thumbs up to the back, and she'll see it, and then we can. That way they can start streaming. Taking that step without going up the steps. Look at you. Look at
You know, you just gotta.
That's it.
You gotta
That's
go
it.
with what you got, man.
That's it, man. As long as you can, you got to do
Yeah.
it. Do it until you can't anymore.
That's right.
How you
Very
been,
true.
man?
Oh man, really good.
Good.
You know, I mean, no complaints at all.
All right.
You know, just as I said to somebody, we all got to sort of reflect on what it means to be living in 2023.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
What's up, brother?
I'm hanging in
Tim,
there,
it's a
man.
pleasure finally meeting
Hey,
you.
absolutely, man. Good to see you. Good to see you.
This should be fun.
Yes, indeed.
Alrighty, righty.
Good with your two.
Yeah, I'm good.
What's up there?
One
How you doing?
Lord, Lord, Lord.
Oh, I know.
Yep, yep.
Good to see you again, Shamina. How you been? So you read banned books, huh?
It's gonna be beautiful.
I was like, trouble.
It should be
Yeah,
fun.
right?
You gotta come check out the installation when you all are finished. It's good.
Oh, you got a collection of banned books?
Yes. Where are you set up?
Between Salon C and D, so on the
Cool.
way into where all the books are, they have us kind of
So they really banned Ruby Bridges?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, they did.
And the film
Blue
about
Side
it too.
can't have that. That is just. That just really makes it clear as crystal, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Like
Clear as crystal.
it's just like it's like you people didn't exist. Nothing that happened to you exists.
Right.
That's right.
And we don't need to worry about it at all.
That's right.
And we don't want our kids actually thinking you're human.
Yep. All the
We-
things.
right.
That's how we have all the children's books up there.
Right.
Really try to help as well.
And the
Yeah.
salons are on what floor? Are they up one? It's down. Okay.
It is a confusing
It
building.
is a very confusing place.
It is.
Every room I walk out of, I'm like, where am I? What
Right.
floor am I on?
The signage is not good.
No, the sound.
Somebody's looking for you.
What's up, brother? You good?
So you should have got that in the mail, right?
I did.
Good,
Yeah, I
good.
should have brought it to get it autographed. But I think you autographed it for me. I don't know.
You know what?
Maybe you
if
did.
I didn't,
I don't-
I will.
But
It's a plan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But we don't need to remember that because Kim's.
yeah, do we?
Okay, cool.
Okay.
I was like,
Like as long as
I
I'm
was
not
like,
doing
run
this.
it back.
I'm
Okay. Okay. 3 minutes.
Yeah, responses.
Okay.
I'm gonna put like a stopwatch on
Last.
Hey, man, good to see you. What you been up to? Absolutely, good to see you.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Oh, so I don't need to worry about it.
And what do we have? We have like an hour and a half total. Is that right?
I think so.
Hey, Kim, you fill up the joints.
Oh, yeah.
No, I have that. I just need the thing because we changed it.
So how's the kids? How's the grands and all that?
Yeah, my son is great. He just got promoted, and my
That's
and my
good.
2 grandbabies are everything.
Oh, yeah. And your pops?
Dad is everything.
Oh, yeah. Tell him I asked about him.
I will. He will love that.
Oh, yeah.
Right by my side in this whole ordeal. Tim, am I hitting you?
Must be a part of the table or something.
Have you been in Cleveland or you been running around a lot
Yeah.
or what?
Yeah, I've been running around, but I'm in Cleveland.
Good, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, my home base. Yeah, I don't see myself leaving there.
No, it's a beautiful community. Beautiful community.
That's right. They absolutely did do that. So thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I'm Kimberly Crenshaw. I am the professor of law at Columbia and UCLA Law School and the executive director of the African American Policy Forum. Thank you. Woo. Thank you so much for having us here today. I am so looking forward to this conversation, especially doing so with people that I've been in conversation with, first at Netroots Nation a while back, on the telephone, under the Black Light series. All of these conversations we're hoping to bring together here to explore the current state of our democratic crises and what racial justice has to do with it. Now, the people in this room are people with power and influence within the Democratic Party. You're here because you care about our democracy, you care about this upcoming election, and also because you care about the role of racial justice in our democracy. I hope that it goes without saying that we cannot save our democracy without saving racial justice. The two go hand in hand. Now, we know over the last couple of years that the growing power of extremism is a power that is largely based in and an expression of ideas such as white nationalism. Right. We know that we have to organize against the popularization of white nationalism. We know that our opponents are powerful. We know that our opponents have been able to center far-right ideas, in part because we don't have fully the tools we need to fight them. Since this last presidential election, here are some snapshots of what this crisis looks like. We saw a violent attempted coup at the United States Capitol. We've seen places like Florida use their states as laboratories for authoritarianism, restricting the knowledge of Black history, banning books, implementing abortion bans, intimidating LGBTQ people, firing teachers, and growing racist and deadly policies like Stand Your Ground. This is, of course, a national problem. And at the front line of our battle for democracy has to be public education. It is the laboratory for our democracy. Democracy's opponents have always known, and they have always acted on the notion that attacking public schools is attacking the possibilities for the freedom that we think we have a right to in a multiracial democracy. We in this room need to forcefully confront these attacks on education because they are foundational to our democratic future. And it's not just happening in our red states, it's happening in blue states as well. 22 million children today, that's nearly half the school-age population, attend schools in which there are now laws that ban the teaching of the truthful history of our nation. So in this environment, we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. Some people, probably some sitting in this room right now, acted like our president's inauguration meant that pro-democracy had won. Somehow, we are all safe. But what we on this stage know, what Black people and other marginalized people know, is that we are decidedly not safe. And that pretending that somehow this fight is in the past tense could not have devastating consequences. We know that we can't afford to look away. We cannot afford to pivot. So I want this conversation to be enlightening. I also want it to be a wake-up call for everyone here. I want it to be a conversation that tells us what we need to know, what we need to do to face this controversy, this crisis, and push back against anti-woke extremism. So thank you for being here. Y'all ready? All right. All right. So let me introduce my speakers briefly. Most of them, all of them really need no introduction, but we do so out of respect. And of course, you can see more about their bios on the screen. Attorney General Keith Ellison is the 30th Attorney General in Minnesota. He formerly served in Congress and was recently the deputy chair for the Democratic National Committee. Now, that's what's on the formal resume. We know what we really want to say about this man. He is the person that brought Derek Chauvin to justice. Woo! He's the one that did what a lot of people said could not be done, and he did it because he understood what we're about to talk about today. So I'm so honored to have him here. Nina Turner is a prominent progressive politician, strategist, and political commentator. Talk about lighting it up. She lights it up every place she goes. We're so happy to have her here. Tim Weiss is among the top anti-racist writers, educators, and activists in the United States. And I just think I read somewhere he's one of 8 anti-woke white people that we all want to sit down and
not anti-woke white.
White woke.
There's literally millions of anti-woke white people.
Anti-woke.
Right.
Millions of anti-woke
white people.
Few,
yes, the opposite of
Woke
that.
AF.
Yeah.
Woke AF.
woke is, yeah, woke S-A-F. Please welcome Tim. And Terrence Woodbury is a preeminent political strategist. He's co-founder of HIT Strategies and one of the few pollsters that's asking the kind of questions that we need to ask. And he's got the answer. So when people tell you we can't get there, we can't talk about these issues, I want you to be able to say, I want you to leave here being able to quote Terrence Woodbury, because he's going to tell us not only how we can talk about these issues, but why we must talk about these issues. So please welcome Terrence Woodbury. Okay, so we've had an agreement. We've been talking a little bit, and we have decided that we want to have a conversation rather than a series of talks. And in order to do this, we have some, very loquacious people, including me. But we've agreed that we're basically going to try to limit our comments to about 3 minutes or so we can actually have an active dialogue with each other. So let me get started, and I'm going to start with Terrence. We have been speaking about 2020 and all of the protests that were ignited by the murder of George Floyd. It sparked mobilizations in 50 states. We saw corporations pledging their resources and their commitments to racial justice. We heard politicians, for the first time, using the terms structural racism. And of course, as I mentioned, we saw the successful prosecution of police officers who were responsible for murder. So talk to us about that summer. What transformed this into where we are now with the war on woke that we're seeing everywhere?
Absolutely, Dr. Crenshaw. Thank you so much for having me. You know, we really do look at the summer 2020, the summer of unrest, of racial reckoning, as an inflection point, not because this is where the movement for Black Lives started. We know that this is a generational movement, but it is a moment where we saw the sentiment of the country begin to shift. You know, many of us participated in those protests. Raise your hand if you participated in any protests in the summer of 2020. A lot of us did. We all saw the complexion of those protests begin to change. 54% of protesters, in fact, were white. Majority of Black Lives Matter protesters were white. This is where we began to see, but 80% of them were under the age of 40. This was a young people's movement, not a black people's movement. It was still a movement about Black lives, but it wasn't just black folks in the movement anymore. This is where we began to see the movement evolve from a movement of black people versus the police to a movement of young people versus racism. The reason that's so important, because we have a moral obligation to continue the progress that we began making in 2020, but also a strategic obligation, a strategic imperative as young people take their rightful place in the body politic, as millennials and Gen Z have now become the biggest voting bloc in America. Still the least likely voter, but the biggest voting bloc. And the reason that's important is because we began to see, as the attitudes of the country shifted, we began to see attitudes of race and justice become ubiquitous across the Democratic electorate. They were no longer black and brown issues. In fact, white progressives often register even higher urgency on these issues. And so this is how we win. We win on issues of race and justice by mobilizing our base, and this is where both the moral and the strategic obligation come in.
So, Terrence, so you've pointed out that there was a transformative moment in 2020, and I want to build on what you said to come to Tim. So out of that moment came an ascendant political movement with a coordinated strategy in all 50 states, highly organized, supremely well-funded. And it's a movement that has political power, legal power, some would even say military power. What is ironic about the movement that came out of 2020 after we listened to what Terrence described? What's ironic about what emerged as the movement out of 2023?
Well, before I answer that, I want to also thank you, Kim, for having me as part of this panel, be up here with some folks I have great respect for, and to be here at this conference with so many folks who I know are committed to addressing these issues of multiracial democracy. The question is interesting because I don't think there's anything actually ironic about the reaction to 2020 on the part of the right. It's not ironic because the whole history of the country is the history of white rage, as Carol Anderson puts it, brilliant scholar at Emory. Every time that there is forward progress, particularly for black people in this country, whether it is material or narrative, which is what the 2020 uprising did, it shifted the narrative. We started talking about systemic racism in the mainstream, not just among activists, but also in media and political circles. Whenever there has been progress for black folk, this is what a certain portion of white America does. And I say that as like I'm a member of that class. I've been white a really long ass time, y'all. Like coming up on 55 years, I sort of know the handshake by now. This is what we do. And And that pushback was predictable. And the reason it was predictable is about something Terrence said. It's one thing when black folk are in the street yelling about racial injustice. The white power structure in America always knows how to deal with that, because they've been dealing with that for hundreds of years. But when you begin to see millions of white folk, particularly your white children and grandchildren, going into the street in solidarity with black and brown people, that's what scares the shit out of some folks, right? That's the thing that keeps them up at night. And what better way to shut down solidarity than to restrict the conversation about the thing that necessitates the solidarity? In other words, let's stop teaching about this in school, make sure the kids don't understand that there's a problem with systemic racism, therefore there's no solidarity that they need to be engaged in the first place. So when it seemed weird to some people. Why are they banning children's books? What a strange obsession. Because those children, if they learn about the history of this country, kids are sort of fair-minded. I have two of them. When you're young, you're not thinking in the ways you've been taught to think yet. You have a general default to fairness. If a child learns about the unfairness of the society, both historically and today, then you lose them forever, because they are going to want to engage in solidarity. So there's nothing ironic. It was entirely predictable. It's in keeping with the whole history of backlash politics. And the key question, which we'll get to, I know, in a little bit here, is why weren't we prepared, right? Why did we not see this coming? Because there are some important answers to that question that I think can inform our activism and our politics. Because everything that's happened in the last year and a half with the so-called war on woke, the so-called war on CRT, neither of which the critics can define, right? If we were to hold them over a bridge by their ankles and threaten to drop them unless they could define them within 60 seconds, a lot of folk are getting dropped, right? And I'm not a violent person, but I'm gonna drop you because you're not gonna have the answer. It doesn't matter though, because we knew this was coming. And so the key for us is to learn from that history of backlash and understand that every step forward is going to provoke that kind of reaction so that we can be prepared to pivot and to move forward in spite of that. But one thing we got to do is take credit for shifting that narrative. We don't take enough credit for the people like y'all who were in the streets and those of us that changed the discussion in this country. You don't backlash when you're not afraid, y'all. These people are backlashing because they're afraid. We did that. Right. And the key is to keep them. We're going to keep pushing forward.
So just drawing the thread, so 2020, huge momentum, opposition to racial injustice, conceptualizations that hold the contradiction in a society, and in fact, we still can see exactly these problems playing out. We see then a movement coming out of that, which is effectively that weaponizes the ideas, that responds to the transformative demands. It takes on legislative and other mechanisms take on what kind of society we are and what has to be done about it. And for the most part, the soldiers can't really define what the thing is that they're against. So Nina, we see people on TV all the time when they're asked, what is woke? What is CRT? What is implicit bias, structural racism? They can't define what it is. Yet they believe these things to be existential threats to their existence. What does this tell us about how these ideas, how this so has been weaponized?
We gotta co-opted, as many of us should know. I want you all to understand that as we sit in this room, that there was a 20th century recording artist by the name of Lead Belly, who on the backs of what happened to the sky put in his song about staying woke. His message was implicit, it was directly for black people. Now, woke has expanded, but some folks have expanded it in ways that it was not necessarily intended to be expanded, and allowed the right, the radical right, to weaponize woke. So when Ledbetter put these words in his song, he said, so I advise everybody be a little careful when they go through there, best stay woke, keep their eyes open, keep your head on a swivel. It was really about black people traveling through the South and understanding that you could die. That really, woke was deliberately for black people and the suppression and oppression and degradation, dehumanization that happened to black people at the hands of a system that was designed to do so. And so when we're dealing with a certain white mentality, and I love how Tim laid out that there will always be a backlash. See, we've been here before, and we talked about that as a panel. This ain't new. We have been here before as a country, and we ought to know how to fix what is broken. And we cannot fix what is broken without acknowledging that within the DNA, the very founding of the United States of America, as much as it may hurt the feelings of some of our light-skinned cousins, was founded on bigotry and racism and hatred and manipulation and dehumanization, and the fact that some white folks in power can't handle the truth is all of our problems. This is not the first time that we've been here as a nation, but we have more tools at our disposal in the 21st century than people had in the 20th century. And let us not forget that some of those people are still walking the face of the earth. This ain't ancient history. The United States is not old enough to have ancient history. So it is important to understand, and we especially need progressives to understand this, that in order to deal with the classism, we got to deal with caste. And in order to deal with caste, we all got to be in agreement as to why the degradation and the dehumanization in this country started in the first place, and it is on the backs and the necks and the hearts and the bodies of black people first. And the way that we are going to find a collective liberation, because that has been the struggle of black people in this country, is only to be liberated and to be treated as equals. What is so wrong with that? That liberation hinges on black people. And that's why we got these haters. The DeSantises of the world, the Abbotts of the world, all of them folks, the Trumps of the world, they are reincarnations of the segregationist governors and leaders in the 20th century, the 19th century, the 18th century. None of this is new. We have been here before.
And with that, Nina, we want to think that history is instructive when we realize that, wait, we've seen this terrain before. When we see that a page is being ripped out of a very old playbook, one would think we would have the capacity to figure out how to interrupt it this time. And part of what is driving the need for this conversation is to figure that out. What do we do this time in which the same kind of ideas, your civil rights violate my civil rights, your demands make me feel bad, your right to inclusion violates my right to exclusion. These were all the responses to civil rights demands over the course of our history. So to see it happen again, and to see us not really being able to figure out how to marshal every resource we can to fight back is the question that drives this conversation. Why does it keep happening? And what do we need to do to respond to this more effectively? So Attorney General Keith Ellison has written a book that helps us talk about this, break the wheel, ending the cycle of police violence. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to take you back to your life before you did this important work, when you were at the center of politics in D.C., where you still are. You just returned from Washington, D.C. with some on-the-ground development. So how widespread is this attack? Of course, it started as an attack on CRT and K through 12 schools. It started with, we have to protect our children against feeling bad and divisive concepts. But we always knew it was about more than that. We always knew it was going to go beyond that. We always knew it was about public education, but it was jump the fence and address a whole range of things. So what's new on the horizon of anti-wokeness that people need to know about?
Well, one of the things that I experienced in the last 24 hours is just that I was at a hearing in front of the Financial Services Committee, and the subject matter called by the Republican majority was to ban, repress, suppress environmental, social, and governance policy in investing your pension funds, right? So what this means is that when there's a movement that says, look, we all want to retire one day, our money is invested in these institutions, and we want to make sure that these institutions are factoring in greenhouse gas emissions, social factors like, I don't know, child labor, you know, and then, of course, governance, which has everything to do with people of color involved in the investment world. And they're trying to exclude it and prohibit the consideration of any of these factors at all, which is interesting because that means that this anti-CRT, anti-wokeness thing really is expanding far beyond the realm of education. Now they want to make sure that it is that you can't even consider these things when you're trying to make an investment decision, which is really strange because the currency of it, the power of it all sort of turns on anti-blackness, doesn't it? Because it's not just the environmental thing, right? You start with the idea that we don't want to share this country with them, and then you begin to move forward from there to say, well, let's not consider anything that might include them. So they call it woke capitalism, as if that's an oxymoron. And so they call it that, and they're going to ban it, and they are passing laws and all over the country, literally in nearly every state that you could imagine, except for the blue one so far. You have these woke investment laws in Texas. Here's an example. In Texas, they said that any bank that has a policy that they don't want to invest in guns and in fossil fuels, we will not allow them to participate in the municipal bond work of the cities of the state of Texas. The state lost, because of this decision, $532 million. Similarly, Kansas, $3.6 billion, and so they're literally paying in order to be anti-woke. The heart and soul of it all is to say, well, one thing is they're using racial division and hostility to sharing the country in order to ensure ExxonMobil continues to make money and get the benefit of pension funds. I mean, there is an angle here, and I'll just wrap up with this last minute by saying, this anti-wokeness, anti-blackness agenda is driving gun sales. It's driving, it's telling people that they shouldn't have the expansion of Medicaid in their state. It is cutting budgets all over the red state world. It is a potent political force, and I'm so glad that you all have packed this room out, standing room only,
Seriously,
to help figure out how is it that we reintroduce and put in the center of our politics racial justice.
So let's start with where you left us off, which is because this is such a potent force, because it is the Trojan horse, because once they started, it was always clear that this was going to jump the fence. It was never going to be just about CRT. And they told it to us. They said clearly, this is not, we don't even really care what CRT is, but where we're going is attacking public institutions, attacking public schools, and now attacking public values. So if we always knew that this is where it's going, if we are seeing things that we've seen before, Tim, why weren't we ready for this?
Well, I think we have to be careful about who wasn't. Like, black folks were ready. Like, black folks knew it was coming. I think white folks either weren't ready or didn't want to be ready, because the history of whiteness is one where it pays quite a bit to sort of ignore the elephant in the room, which is often racism, racial injustice, white supremacy. The desire to step around race, to somehow finesse race, is sort of what we do. And so I think, and I can give you a couple of historical examples. I remember, when I started my career 35 years ago, or 33 years ago, was doing work against David Duke when he ran for the U.S. Senate and governor in Louisiana in 90 and 91. In that campaign, keep in mind, this is a Nazi. This is not a word I use lightly. I'm Jewish. I sort of reserve it for those that it applies to. This is an actual Nazi, and yet we had consultants coming in, high-paid, Democratic Party, ostensibly liberal. One of them was Mark Penn, so I know shit happens. But that was when he was still a Democrat. That was when he was ostensibly still a liberal. And they came in and told us, yeah, he's a Nazi, but I think you might not want to say that in your campaign ads because it might alienate white people who we need to vote against him. So instead, we should focus on the fact that he paid his property taxes 3 years late and dodged the draft in Vietnam, which is arguably the only thing he ever did right in his life. Right? And so we sat there sort of slack-jawed, like, you're saying we can't even talk about racism with a former Klan leader and overt white supremacist. They said, yeah, it's not going to work. We finally ignored them. Actually, the first time we got suckered, and we did these really, weird messaging that it was part about the racism and part about the taxes. You know what happened? Black folks stayed home because they didn't know what we were asking. Like, who were you asking us to vote against, a tax dodger or a Nazi? Because if you stayed on the racism, we'd probably show up, but we're not real happy with the message. Meanwhile, 6 out of 10 white folks still voted for the Nazi. So the next year, when we started talking about racism as a moral issue, as something that violated the moral conscience of the country in the state of Louisiana, he still got 55% of the white vote, my people, my people, my people. But black turnout was 88%. That's right. And the white progressives who stayed home in 1990 got out and voted, and he got beaten 61-39. It proved that you actually don't want to finesse. The second story, in 95, I was doing community organizing and went to D.C. for a conference of the Conference on Budget and Policy Priorities, people that are nice policy folk, nice liberal policy folk. It was during the welfare reform debate. And when we came in from Louisiana saying, you got to talk about the racialized nature of this welfare reform discussion. You can't talk about the attack on poor women without noticing that they are disproportionately black and brown. And we were being told by white liberals, shh, don't talk about that. It'll scare the white people. So this is a habit that we have of not being ready, or being ready but being too afraid to have the honest conversations. And here's the dirty little secret. It does not work. It does not work. At the end of the day, they do what they do anyway while we're sitting around trying to be as careful and cautious as we can be, and then we still lose most of the time.
So Tim, you've laid out that, again, they keep taking our lunch, and we keep saying, or keep being told, we can't come out swinging. Nina, obviously, there is weakness in our ability to respond to this, even though we keep seeing the same thing over and over again. So it's clearly a failing strategy for Democrats to try to pivot, yet we keep doing it. So what's this telling us that has to be different?
Well, I was trying not to come in too hot, Professor, but
come on.
It tells us that the Democratic Party is part of the problem. And I'm thinking of a speech by Minister Malcolm X where he talked about the ballot or the bullet. And he talked about revolutions and revolutions being bloody. He did hold out hope that the United States of America might be a place where we could have a bloodless revolution. In that lecture that he gave, he also went on to say to black people that you put Democrats first, but they put you last. It is the same as when he gave the speech in the 60s as it is happening now, because black people are the only voting bloc that votes almost 100%. Everybody else, all our other cousins will tiptoe out. Every now and then, they'll make some other kind of demands. But black folks can be guaranteed to vote overwhelmingly for a party that does not give a damn. And I don't want to hear nothing about the Republicans, because I already know where today's Republicans stand. We get that. We understand that. But when you have a party that enjoys overwhelmingly the majority of the black vote, and they don't stand up for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, they don't want to do away with the filibuster, They don't stand up and say, come hell or high water, I'm gassing up the jet. I will be in every state in the union over what the United States Supreme Court did against affirmative action. We got a problem. We already know about today's Republicans. That ain't nothing new. What I cannot understand is why the Democratic Party will not use the full force and weight of this magnificent moment. There is promise in the problem. And the fact that they can't see the promise because they don't have the intestinal fortitude, let me keep this PG, they don't have the intestinal fortitude to stand up against anti-blackness like their lives depended on it, because guess what? Millions of people in this country, lives do depend on one of these parties doing the right thing. We fighting against neo-fascism. We fighting against neoliberalism. Neo-fascism kills you quick. Neoliberalism kills you slow. And that is why we're in the problem that we're in right now.
So I'm coming to you, Terrence. I'm coming to you. Now I see everybody itching, right? So now I got to try to manage the itch. So, Terrence, the conventional wisdom says that what Nina is pointing out and explicitly demanding is just not political reality right now, that we cannot go into elections with a robust racial justice agenda. What does your polling and research tell you about that conventional wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I do have to respond to the fact that, I don't know any Democrat in Congress that does not support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I don't know any Democrats in Congress that do not support the George Floyd
Justice and Policing.
Justice and Police Reform Act. What we don't have is 60 votes in the Senate to get it done. And the second thing that we don't have is a robust enough vocal response, a vocal defense of Black lives from Democrats. And I think that is an absence of message and not an absence of intent. I think when we look at the intent of Democrats and we look at what they are doing and not just what they are not saying, they are when Joe Biden became president, Black Lives Matter was registered as a terrorist organization. Today, the Proud Boys have been indicted for sedition. We see actions taking place to reverse some of the injustices that were happening under Donald Trump. I don't think that they are nearly as urgent, and I don't think that the vocal response has been adequate. And that is where we have to change the message of the party, and where Democrats need to understand. This is where I say we have both the moral and a strategic obligation, because when Joe Biden ran for president, he didn't just run on increasing wages and creating jobs. He ran to restore the soul of America. That ain't an economic commitment, right? And so we did, and so we do have to make progress here, especially because we see 90% of non-Republicans saying that they expect politicians to do more, to increase 93% of non-Republicans saying that it is important for politicians to do more to improve race relations in this country. So what do they want to see us doing to improve race relations? They want to see Americans become more tolerant of each other's differences. They want us to learn about the impacts of race and racism on society. The things that they are demanding that we do are, in fact, critical race theory, right? And so what we now need to do is demand from them. We have to start asking the questions of these Democratic leaders who are doing some of the right things, but far too often afraid to say those things because they are trying to appeal to a moderate swing electorate. Well, the first thing we have to do is build and mobilize our base. And building and mobilizing our base starts with those protesters that we saw in 2020. That is where the energy in this party came from in 2020. That's what turned the tide of that election. And we have to re-engage that energy by speaking truth to power and by actually putting forth a proactive agenda that sets an alternative to the vision that Republicans are putting forward.
So, Keith, we've been talking about the backlash and the response to the backlash, but one of the things that's also missing is that the backlash now has state power behind it. It's not just an ideological, it's not just a party thing. We've got attorney generals in some states actually issuing binding legal memos that equate anti-racism and critical race theory with racial discrimination and actually banning the teaching of these ideas, not just in schools, but across the government, and eventually they're trying to get at DEI. So what are your thoughts on how this weaponization has actually garnered state power, the power of law, to advance their anti-woke war?
Well, it's a great question, because ultimately it is a matter of what are the rules, and what rules and what can be enforced, what can you be punished for. I honestly believe that these rules are not really the law. They are pronouncements, but I don't think any of this stuff is enforceable at all. In fact, I think we got to challenge some of these claims that you can't say teach 16, 19. I think students have a right to know, and I think it's legally cognizable. And I think we've got to push back on that. We've got to organize among attorneys general, and I want you to know that we are. You know, we've done a number of things, and we need to do much, much more. But, for example, in the state of Minnesota, we actually did pretty well on a racial justice agenda last session. Racial justice agenda, driver's licenses, which were denied to people who were not born in the United States, were not citizens. We broke that, and now you can, if you can drive a car and show it, you can get a license. Felons voting, very racialized. You know, now you can, if you're out, you can vote. Family medical leave, nearly every program, is seen as something that's going to help blacks, and so we don't want to do that. The famous Lee Atwater quote. Some of y'all know the Lee Atwater quote. It's where he said, in the 50s, you say in. By the 60s, you can't say that, so now you got to talk about busing. By the 70s, you can't say that. You just got to say government programs. Everybody understands blacks get hurt worse. That's what he said out of his mouth on tape. So I just want to say, yes, we've got to be clear about the racial justice agenda. Now, and the felons voting thing is going to help mostly white people, although we know crime is racialized. Wage theft. Most of the people who benefit in Minnesota are white, but it's often those people of color who are the first victims of it. But state power is where it was back in the redemption period. Yep. They claimed state power. They claimed the Supreme Court. And so state power is what we've got to grab. One of the questions I'd like to know from our team up here is it true that white people are too fragile to hear a message of racial justice and racial solidarity? Do they always flee from that, or is that a democratic presumption that's not really true?
Yep.
I'd love to know what people think about that.
And that's a perfect segue to come back to Tim, because on the assumption
Perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Speak for all the white people.
speak for your
Go, Tim, white people.
I assure you, I have been deputized to speak for no white people.
But Tim, on that very assumption that the fragility, I mean, even the concept of fragility has been weaponized, and disinformation has underwritten efforts to remove these ideas from polite conversation. It's not just the power, though, of the MAGA right that explains this situation. It is also the inability, the willingness of friendlier forces to allow this to happen. So there's the effort to finesse. Okay, we can talk about race, but we can only talk about it in a particular way, only as a weapon of the rich to divide us. Of course, that's true. But that doesn't actually capture all of the ways that racism is actually functioning. It doesn't tell us why the black mortality rate for black women is astronomical. That's not just about white power trying to separate. There is a materiality to anti-black racism that many of these efforts to finesse the conversation doesn't get at. So what do we need to know in order to do better at talking about and mobilizing about the real ways that white supremacy, the past, has undermined our ability to protect our democracy today?
So first off, fragility is real, but like if you have fragile bones, the doctor is going to tell you to take calcium or something that is going to be like, well, you're fragile, so don't bump into shit. Like they're gonna tell you there are ways to be less fragile. And in this particular instance, yeah, white folks historically show a lot of fragility when these issues are brought up, but the answer is not to then run away from it and to coddle the fragility. It is to demand of white folks that we can do better, that we should do better, that there is actually a history of white anti-racist solidarity, which they do not teach us in school and do not want us to learn in school, even though that, by the way, would deal with some of the white guilt and shame they're so worried about, right? If you taught about white solidarity and allies, then white folks could have different role models. When they say in the war on CRT that you're making my kids feel bad, if you feel bad about being white, it is because you were learning about the wrong damn white people. And we could fix that problem, but only if we're prepared to lean into it. So what we end up doing is try to finesse and dance around. And the reason it's so dangerous is I don't care what you're focused on. If you're focused on healthcare, if you're focused on education, if you're focused on housing, whatever issue you're focused on, unless you address the racial justice piece, none of that is going to end up succeeding, because it is racial resentment and hostility that keeps progressive policy from being implemented. The reason the ACA was so hard to get passed was because of racism, and at the end of the day, the research is clear. The reason we don't have universal, affordable care for everyone in this country, even today, is because large numbers of white folks say black people will abuse the program, and so they will go without their own insulin, they will go without their own damn health care just to keep black folk from having it. This is the insight of critical race theory that we have to insist upon. It's not just, as some would say, let's talk about class and we have to talk about race. If you want class solidarity, you have to address the thing that is keeping it from happening, and that is that there are white workers who for generations have been told you may not have much, but at least you got more than that black person, so you might as well take that to the bank. As Cheryl Harris says, whiteness is property, and if that's the only property you got, you will cash that check. It is time for us to insist that there is a better check to cash, not just because the rich are manipulating us, but because we have allowed ourselves to be manipulated and not to see the commonality of interest that we have with black and brown people.
Speak that truth.
I'm going to resist my church tendency. Preach. Okay.
Well, you asked me to speak for white people, so I hope I...
So, Nina, I know you want to get on this. So help us to mobilize the ways of bridging the gap between the talking heads that are out there representing the received wisdom and the kind of sensibility that you've expressed, what we just heard Tim express, the kind of sensibility actually that young people who are the future of democracy respond to. What are the ways, the avenues, what do we need to do to capture that sensibility?
Well, we definitely need an inside and an outside game, and what I mean is we can't necessarily always depend on elected folks.
That's right.
Even though it would be nice, and you got some elected folks that you can depend on, but you can't always depend on our kind to do the right thing. So we do need an inside-outside game, meaning we gotta keep trying to elect people who will do the right thing, but on the outside, it's the pressure. All the great movements of this country came from pressure on the outside. There might have been a face, a political face up front, but the push to do it came from a mighty outside force, and we cannot lose sight of that. Now, but we still need somebody on the inside. We need a combination of LBJ and FDR, all flawed, with a whole bunch of Barbara Jordan and Shirley Chisholm, them two congresswomen swirled up in there. That's really what we need. And the reason why I bring up LBJ, because LBJ is on record, you know, calling black people all kinds of ends and all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna put that in the parking lot. I don't wanna get too carried away. However, we needed his force to go straight eye to eye with segregationists and say, whatever, it might not have been moral, but he said, let the record reflect that my legacy will be that the Civil Rights Act will get passed and the Voting Rights Act. We don't have that today. And I hope that Dr. Crenshaw, I'm gonna respect the time, I hope they're coming back around to me because I wanna address this whole helplessness of the Democratic Party. I have higher expectations of my two toddlers than we do of people who got full power. They ain't got enough. They ain't got a super majority. They ran in 2020 and said, give us the majority and we gonna make some material things happen, and then all of a sudden they don't make them happen. When I'm out in the streets, people are sick and tired of having to choose between the lesser of the two evils. And that's still evil. So what I want you guys to understand is that what we are going through right now did not start with Donald J. Trump. And we have got to stop the Trump derangement syndrome. What he represents is the bubbling up in real time in our lifetime of the things that we have not dealt with in these United States of America. To go back to something that Tim said, and Doc, I'm gonna wrap this thing up, maybe kind of sort of, no I am. We need some John Brown kind of white folks. Y'all know what I'm saying? Right, you know, that you really, it's the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator. How much you gonna put on the line? John Brown put it all on the line. He put his son's life on the line. Those are the kinds of allies that we really need. I hope to God when I get a closing remark after this, because I'm gonna go in. Am I not going in right now?
You're gonna go in.
Right, you're gonna start going in.
You're there.
You're gonna go in at some point.
You are there. You are there. Terrence, let me build on, you know, the point that Nina is just making in terms of some of the responses that we've been talking about for 2 years now, right? So we started working together around the Virginia election. We were in conversation with those who were saying that terms like critical race theory and ideas like 1619 and woke had been so polarized that they had to be politically avoided, unspoken at all costs. The only real strategy was to abandon this knowledge and the history out of which it came. And so, you know, we thought, well, is that really true? Is that really the only play that we can make? Just, you know, here, take it and leave us alone. We can outrun our own shadow. So number one, tell us about what you thought we were going to find when we went into Virginia and what's different. And tell us how this idea that the safe strategy for anyone who wants a future is not to talk about any of this stuff, because I think you have experience on both sides of this.
Absolutely. You know, that Virginia election was so interesting because it was just a year after Joe Biden had won Virginia by almost double digits, and then Terry McAuliffe loses it. And we saw how critical race theory was weaponized in that election. We saw how Glenn Youngkin was able to use and weaponize, and what he ended up doing was turning out 90% of Trump voters, while Terry McAuliffe the 90% of the Trump voters that had voted a year prior, but Terry McAuliffe only turned out 68% of the Biden voters that had turned out a year prior. Well, which voter stayed home? Young people and people of color. The two groups that overwhelmingly prioritize racial justice, the two groups that were in those streets marching just a year prior. And what did we see when we went in there? I wish we had time to play these clips from these focus groups. What I expected to see when we started focus grouping Democratic voters in Virginia a week after Terry McAuliffe lost, I expected them to be pissed off at critical race theory, to say, look at why we lost. Because of critical race theory, we weren't able to win. When in fact what we found was that they were pissed off about losing. They were pissed off at Democrats for not, and the exact quote from white parents a week after the election was, the problem in this election was that Republicans came out swinging. They came out guns blazing. and Democrats showed up too late, showed up with a knife to a gunfight. I mean, there's a lot of violent metaphors in here, but y'all understand the point. Is that there's an expectation of Democrats to show up to these fights, to put forth an affirmative, proactive vision of a multiracial democracy, and to not shy away from these racial justice, from what are considered culture war. I keep telling the Democrats that we work with that not showing up to the culture war is exactly how you forfeit it. That's how you lose. They have declared war. And we don't win that war by raising wages and creating jobs. We have to show up with an alternative approach. And so that requires us not to defend critical race. Look, I just saw a Democrat, a very high-ranking Democrat on TV say that Democrats ain't woke. He literally said, you know, Democrats ain't worried about woke. Democrats are worried about creating jobs and lowering health care. And I saw, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson say in her hearing that she wasn't a critical race theory. Well, that affirmative action dissent is critical race theory if I've ever read it. How we got here, how the laws of our society are how these injustices exist today, and where it is going to take us if we don't fix it. That is critical race theory. And so what we have to stop doing, we have to stop rejecting critical race theory. We have to stop saying we don't teach critical race theory in school, because that implies that we don't think it should be. That implies that they are right. We don't need to defend critical race theory. We need to define it, right? We need to say instead of saying Democrats ain't woke, it is, well, if Democrats believe in a multiracial society that prioritizes not just fairness but justice, if that is woke, then we woke AF.
So, Tim, I want to come back to you on this point. So, as Terrence just said, some of the response was to run. We don't teach that. We are not that. These are not our values, when in fact they are our values. And some of the things that were taught are the things that we want our children to be exposed to. So when we look at what's been taken out of the curriculum, Toni Morrison, one of the most celebrated authors of the 20th century, one of the most banned authors today. Contemporary authors, Ta-Nehisi Coates, a teacher was fired for teaching an essay that he has written. James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston. The list is long and shocking, right? And while this is happening, there are allies who should be standing up and doing better. So I think about Scholastic, that told an author who wrote a book about her grandparents who had been interned, Japanese Americans, had been interned. She had racism in the book. They asked her to take it out. How do you tell the story of internment without talking about racism? How do you tell the story of the Montgomery bus boycott and Rosa Parks by taking out any reference to white supremacy and segregation? Yet many of our institutions, like publishers, like the College Board, are succumbing to these demands. They are appeasing the right. So they can't do it without appeasement, and we can't fight without addressing the appeasement. So what are the imperatives that we need to leave here with? Being able to see when our side is appeasing, being able to bring the pressure where we need to in order to win this woke, anti-woke attack.
Well, I mean, I think that in order to push back against this particular iteration of white rage, it's important that we speak directly to those young people and have young people leading this charge to fight back. We have seen actually some victories in various places around the country where local school boards were removing books, and it was the students who stood up and demanded that those books be put back in the schools. So I don't think that that has to come top down. I think a lot of the grassroots energy around fighting this is coming from the young people themselves. One thing that young people don't like being told, they don't even have to be particularly left or progressive or radicalized or even that politicized. You don't tell 14-year-olds what they can and can't read. It pisses them off. As a general rule, you don't tell teenagers where they can and can't go, what they can and can't see, what they can and can't read. So I think we want to appeal to that inherent sense of a young person's right to information. What they do with that information, we can't control, but the right to information. I'll say one more thing. You know, several years ago, like 15 years ago, there was an incredible, actually almost 20 years ago, the folks in Tucson, Arizona had created an incredible curriculum for their high schools. It was a voluntary curriculum. It was a La Raza Studies, Chicano Studies program in the TUSD. And of course, the state of Arizona banned it because they said, and this was an early iteration of anti-wokeness, they said this is anti-American, it's teaching hatred for white people by allowing students voluntarily to take a curriculum that is done through a Chicanx lens. Whether it was the history, the literature, the science classes, math, it was all done with a Mexican-American studies lens. And you know what was happening? It was fascinating. The students that went through that program, and they weren't all brown kids, they weren't all Chicanx kids, but the ones who were and went through that program were going to college at a rate of 78%. The Chicanx kids who were from the same neighborhoods, same demographic profile, who didn't go through that program went to college at 17%. So what we know is the program was working to create greater opportunity, which is why it was shut down, y'all. They shut it down because it was working, not because it was failing. But what happened is when they got rid of it, and now the court has reversed that and said that was an unconstitutional action. But when they got rid of it, you know what the parents and the students did and the teachers that created it? They didn't just sit around and whine and say, well, we got to get that program back and we'll fight it in court and we'll try to get new people elected. They took it upon themselves to educate their children about the history that was being ignored. I don't trust the schools of this country to teach kids anything accurately around racism because they never have. The state of Texas only started admitting that the Civil War was about enslavement and white supremacy in 2019, just in time for them to remove it again, I guess. Right. They had like 2 years of honesty. So if we're waiting around for the schools to do the job that we as parents need to be doing, we could be starting banned book clubs. We could be starting dangerous knowledge extracurricular events. We could be having these events on the weekends in our homes. Just like folks go to soccer practice, they go to, political education camp, right? I don't mean camp. That sounds a little authoritarian or a little mind control-ish. I know that's bad, but you know what I mean? Like political, community-based, popular education. That's something the Black Panthers did. They didn't wait for the schools to teach black children about black history. They did that. So we have to also use those, that's that inside-outside game. Yeah, it's important to have people in positions, but it's also important to take some of that initiative and say, we will teach our babies, right?
And let me use this as a moment to jump in. Critical Race Theory Summer School this year is doing Freedom to Learn, right? Looking forward looking back to move forward, right? So there are many ways that we can take this as a moment to recapture the knowledge that's forbidden. It's just like our votes. When people are trying to take something away from us, that needs to be the wake-up call that this thing is valuable. So in the same way that they're trying to take away our votes, tell us that this is political power that we cannot leave on the table, their desire to take away our knowledge, passed down from all those people who survived the unsurvivable, that's what they're trying to take away. So if they want to take it away from you, that's the signal that you need to fight for it all the more. And let me get one last plug for those of you who are actually in the audience. AAPF's booth has many of the books that they are trying to take away. So come and get one, come and learn what knowledge that they are trying to forbid actually is, and then use that knowledge to fight like our lives depend on it, because guess what?
It does.
They do. So Keith, let me come to you for, first of all, talk about books. Let's just say a little bit about what is in this book. And tell us.
DeSantis don't like this book.
It's good. So we have a list of books that are currently banned and books that show enough going to be banned. So this is a show enough going to be book. So talk to us about your book and talk to us about the lessons. And now we're in the final stretch. So what are the lessons that need to be lifted up as we go into 2024, which will be the election that is about the future of our democracy?
So let me tell you, and many of you know this, but I'll say it anyway. We have got to have a every single day, 24/7 relationship-based organizing model. We've got to organize all the time around confidently asserting the values that we believe in. We cannot have this transactional model that the Democratic Party specializes in, where they come sometime in the middle of October to the black church and say, y'all gonna vote, right?
That's right.
We've got to have this thing where we are constantly organizing. In fact, expanding the electorate, expanding the space is exactly how we win in a moment when all they're doing is trying to shrink and suppress the base. Notice how they're shrinking, suppressing. Our activity needs to be expansion and engagement. And I love the idea of what you were saying, Tim. What about some Saturday morning teach-ins around the critical issues that we're all facing? What about lifting up these issues? That's what we really got to do. Now, my book, I'll tell you, is the fact that it fell to me to prosecute the people who murdered George Floyd. We have prosecuted other acts of official misconduct since then. But the reason the book is called Break the Wheel is because there's a 100-year-plus cycle of tragic violence by the state against black and brown people and others. And yet, what do we see? We see the tragic incident, we see the protests, we see the study, and then we see the inaction. And this book is how we break that wheel. And there are a number of things that we must do, but they all hinge upon people power. They all hinge upon people's active engagement. I never would have got this case if people weren't in the street demanding that it be sent to me. I'm well aware of that. I know that I didn't get the case because of my own personal charm and wit. I got it because people said, I don't know if Cedric Frazier's here. He led Representative Frazier led a group of people that says send the case to Ellison. And so that's how I ended up getting there. But this is what the book is about. It's about people power combined with just doing the basics of holding people accountable. It's about lifting up people like Darnella Frazier, 17-year-old girl who did not know George Floyd. By the way, nobody on the scene knew George Floyd. By the way, not everybody on the scene was black. We had a number of white people and Asian people demanding, get off of him, he can't breathe. And then when he stopped talking, that's when they whipped out their phones and they did all that they could. And then they showed up a year later to demand that the true story be told, which led to the conviction. This is how we're gonna get this problem straightened out. Robust activity, human solidarity, understanding that that it is within our power to end police brutality, state-sponsored violence, arbitrary violence from the government, which reinforces racial hierarchy. And so that's what the book is about. And after we convene, I'll be outside signing copies if anybody's interested.
And for the folks watching us, where can they get this?
Anywhere books are sold.
Anywhere books are sold, y'all. So let's make sure we all learn the lesson that many people said was unlearnable. There was no way to do it. Keith showed that there actually is. So please get the book. And while we're on the topic of police violence, on Tuesday, Say Her Name will also be published. Also talking about police violence against black women on Haymarket, and we also have some copies at the booth, so look out for that book. And let me also just end with Keith by saying, look, this is an example that shows that, first of all, it is possible to fight racial injustice, but it is not possible to think that this is not going to be, quote unquote, polarizing. When there are people who stand behind the unfettered right of the police to do whatever they want, when there are people who stand behind the idea that white nationalism is a legitimate political project, we're going to be in a polarized environment.
Right.
So the issue is not polarization. The issue is white nationalism. The issue is proto-fascism. That is the issue. So whenever you hear that the problem is polarization, say, no, wait. The problem is their efforts to destroy our democracy. So if we're going to be polarized about whether we're going to have a democracy or not, I'm on the side of polarizing around whether we're going to have a democracy, because that is not a battle that we are willing to lose. Nina, I know you're ready.
Yeah.
So tell us what we got to do, and we are in our last 10 minutes. So.
Yeah, thanks for that.
7 minutes.
7 minutes. I want to say these names because I don't want to forget. If I ran out of time, I want to censor their names first. Mother Fletcher, Leslie Randall, Hughes Van Ellis. 109, 108, and 102. Those are their ages. Black Wall Street. These folks are still alive today. There was just a ruling that they don't deserve reparations. Now, if don't nobody else deserve reparations, they do.
Yes.
And their very existence takes away all the excuses about how my folks didn't do this to you and you weren't directly impacted. These three incredible people are still alive today and being denied what is owed to them, what they had to witness as young children, and the impact that it has on them. They went and testified before Congress, and folks smiled and took pictures and shit like they do. And not one thing came out of it. See, this is the kind of stuff that burns all of me. Because it's one thing to take the picture and to smile and to say how wrong this is. There's another thing to use power, which leads me to a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about power and love. He said, power without love is reckless and abusive. Power without love. So what I want to say to the Democratic Party, of which I am a member of, even though many of they don't want me, but that's okay. I'm still there. For now. They got a whole bunch of power, but they don't have a whole bunch of love. Because love conquers all. You can't tell me that we let rotten Republicans, most of them, I ain't going to say 100% of them, but most of them, especially on the federal level. No, because I know some Republicans on local level, so I'm trying to parse it a little bit. Just a little bit. How is it that they can get their agenda through, but Democrats can't get their agenda through? See, inquiring minds want to know. And so I had a boss who used to say, if your hair is on fire, act like your hair is on fire. Well, damn it, my hair is on fire. And I can't just sit back and continue to pretend that we got one party that just absolutely don't give a damn, and we got another one that is complicit in terms of not using the power that they have because they do not love. They'll talk it, but they don't love it. So power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So what I want to say to these folks with fancy titles who act like they scared, they need to get out and let some folks with some courage and some backbone and some spine and some vision in the place. Now, for a movement to have love and have no power, that's part of the problem. So we got to elect more folks who, when they get the power, they stand up for the people.
That's right.
We got to elect folks, Mayor, who say, I might only get one term, but you gonna know I was here. Hello, somebody? I might only get one, but you gonna know I was in the place. We have got to stop being complicit in our own demise, and we have got to stop allowing either one of these parties. The reason why, and I see my sister, the reason why I'm riding so hard on the Democrats is because today's Republicans have shown that they have lost their ever-loving minds. That is clear. But on the other side of this, we can't have a political party that lacks the intestinal fortitude, the ovaries, the cojones, whatever you want to call it, because I'm still trying to be PG here, to use power in a way that shows that they get it to change the material conditions of people who are suffering in this country, starting with black people. See, when black people are liberated, baby, everybody is liberated.
All right. So the representative for white folk,
Here we go again.
the one we want.
I feel like everyone's white friend. It's okay. What do you want to know?
How we can turn it around, Tim? Help us.
I mean, look, Nina has said most all of it and far more eloquently than I, but I think the premise and what we're all trying to convey is that you can run away from this framing all you want, but the other side won't stop chasing you with the framing.
That's right.
So we and as proof of this, look, when I started out 30-something years ago, I remember folks would say, don't say racism or don't say anti-racism, say you're a diversity trainer. Well, first of all, that isn't the shit that I did. But more importantly, the idea was, oh, people can swallow the word diversity, right? But just not anti-racism. Well, now, diversity, which was this weak T thing that we all sort of made fun of, right? Like it was this corporatized, capitalized thing that the companies would bring in and they'd have somebody say, you want the white jelly beans and the red jelly beans and the yellow jelly beans and the black jelly beans in the jar. You don't want any to stick on the bottom. Now give me $30,000 for telling you that shit. We used to make fun of that, but now even the term diversity is like, oh, no. That's just that's a Trojan horse for wokeness. So the point is, they aren't going to stop because you make nice with them. That's right. They aren't going to stop because you are at the same cocktail party and you have drinks together and you collaborate on some piece of legislation that you might be able to agree on. These folks are playing for keeps. And when they are in power, they do not care if they get anything done. They are willing to get nothing done in Congress right now. They are willing to have hearings on some bullshit that we know is not going to mean anything, just for the comms, just for the Twitter feed, just so they can get on YouTube and their people at home will be like, well, they're standing up for me, right? It's all political theater, and they will continue to push the envelope no matter what we do. So if they're going to come out swinging, we have no option. You can't run away from it. You have to hit folks right in the mouth, politically speaking, again, with the violent metaphors. I'm sorry. But you have to do that. The other side is not going to be satisfied. That's what white rage theory and Carol Anderson's book will teach you about history. They don't let up. They are coming for all of it. And so the only, real advice is to be as insistent about justice and multiracial democracy as these folks are about injustice, inequality, and maintaining traditional hierarchy, because they are down for that and they are willing to die for that. And I'm not sure that we're even willing to live for the things that we believe in.
Come on.
Whoa.
Come on.
All right.
Say that.
In other words, when
don't make me come after that. Don't make me follow. Don't make me follow them three.
Hey, yeah, you know what?
I gotta follow these three.
You up for it, Terrence? Because you know what? You know that there's some people in the audience who are listening, probably maybe with their arms crossed, like, okay, I feel it, but how do we do it, right? You guys are putting some stuff out there that's just not attainable in the current political environment, and you know differently. That's your super skill. So share it with us on our way out the door.
I mean, look, I hate the violent metaphors as well, but look, they chose violence. We don't get to not respond to the war that they have declared. And we don't get to retreat from the war that they have declared. And we don't get to move the line. Don't say critical race theory. Let's just call it true history. That is moving the line. That is concession. We cannot concede. If we believe that this is not a partisan issue. I mean, racism, there's a right and a wrong side. There's not a left and a right side of racism. There's not a Democrat and Republican side of racism. There's a right side and there's a wrong side, and we know that we are on the right side. You don't concede when you're on the right side, okay? And so we know that racial justice is not only the moral right side, it's also, and this is where Dr. Crenshaw likes me to get into the numbers, it's the right side, but it's also the winning side. It's the majority side. It's the 50+1 side. It's how you win, right? And when we look at what happened in Virginia, when we conceded, when we moved the line on critical race theory and started talking about the need to teach the truth and what happened? We moved the line and we started seeding our base. Those young people and those people of color stayed home. They are putting racism on the ballot, and it's moving their voters. We have to put anti-racism on the ballot and mobilize our folks with it. Critical race theory is racial justice, and it is the path to victory. We don't get to concede that.
All right. I want to thank my friends for joining me today, Keith, Nina, Tim, and Terrence. I also want to thank my amazing staff at the African American Policy Forum for facilitating this. Please join me in giving everyone a round of applause. And I want to say, first of all, if you like this, join us for summer school. It is virtual. You can find out more about it by going to aapf.org. If you want to get involved, freedomtolearn.net is the place where this conversation is ongoing. Don't forget our books. This is Keith Ellison's. You can also get a free book at our booth. And finally, I just want to, we heard from Dr. King. Let me end with one more. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Come on.
Let's raise our voices together. Thank you, everybody.
Woo! Look at this place. Man, standing room.